Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Freeze Podcast, the podcast about hip-hop chatter. Today, I wanted to do a deep dive into the phenomenon known as emo rap. Now, what is emo rap? Well, that I believe is a contentious issue and is the topic of today's episode. So it's a genre, in my opinion, that has been ill-defined as no one seems to have a clear answer on what it is. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
The Freeze
Podcast.
The Freeze
Podcast.
The Freeze Podcast.
So, emo rap, to me at least, is a parallel subgenre to post-punk. Essentially, emo rap is a thoroughfare where post-punk elements boil down into hip-hop culture, combined with the writing style of sadcore, meaning themes of heartbreak, loss, and misery. In today's episode, we'll analyze 3 eras of music documenting what I believe to be the evolution of emo rap. Now, the first record that comes to mind is from Minnesota native Slug, who is known for his work as the rapping half of Atmosphere. And the record we're looking at is 2002's God Loves Ugly. God Loves Ugly is an angry, angsty record. Songs like, Fuck You, Lucy is a record that aims its vitriol against a woman whom he believes led him on. While in this day and age it would feel like incel bait, Slug balances his misogynistic tendencies with his own self-loathing and self-deprecation. Atmosphere would continue to write emo raps, as noted by Exclaim magazine, as Thomas Quinlan writes, Atmosphere 7 Travels is some of the rappingest emo hip-hop you're likely to hear. And yeah, I would definitely agree with this sentiment. The titular track, God Loves Ugly, is very emo as well. So if I can just pull up the lyrics from genius.com. God Loves Ugly. So, let's see here. Okay. I don't know, just lines like talking to my shadow, he advised me not to worry, said should plant my tree and let it rise out of the fury. So, next album I'd like to discuss is Hell's Winter by Cage Kennels. I fixed me when I broke the aggression, but I'm still attracted to my beautiful depression. Full disclosure, Hell's Winter is probably one of my favorite hip-hop albums of all time. It, in my opinion, embodies a punk rock ethos, Everclear with a song like Grand Ole Party Crashin', with Jello Biafra from, I believe it's the Dead Kennedys, but brings this sadness out in an evocative portrait of loss, mourning, and misery. Again, coming back to those themes. So his subsequent albums, like Depart From Me, features the song Nothing Left to Say is an ode to his fellow comrade and label mate, I believe at the time, rapper and producer Kamuto. Then you got like anthems like Captain Bumout and Scenester that are sort of like ironic or post-ironic takes. So Scenester about the subculture of scene kids, so to speak, right? So I feel that was very like on the pulse of the emo scene rock at the time. So I think that's I think that, to me, that is one of the definitive examples, in my opinion. Now, going on the mainstream side, I'd say we'll talk about Kid Cudi and the Man on the Moon series. I've actually written about Kid Cudi pretty extensively. So, for example, I wrote a feature piece where I wrote about the meaning of Kid Cudi's impact for an entire depressed generation. There are a lot of kids who really resonated with Kid Cudi's music and potentially saved, people's lives with certain songs. And to me, Kid Cudi definitely also had sort of like a rebellious, countercultural, even culturally, I would say almost punk too, in a sense. And he's done songs with Cage. Cage appeared on the Man on the Moon 2 album. And they even did a short film together named Maniac. So I've always seen them as sort of like scene or alternative personalities, if you will, right? So even though Kid Cudi obviously has had more mainstream success, to the point where, interestingly enough, and this is just a little tidbit that I might cut out, Cage, when he was in his Hell's Winter, maybe pre-Depart From Me era, got on Much Music and kind of took a jab at Much Music, where he was on their I believe it was called Subterranean, where they played like what they considered more like underground music. And he's like, well, if you know anything about me, I probably shouldn't be on. Wait, did I say Much Music? I meant MTV. The American one. So MTV America. Yeah. So MTV Subterranean. Yeah. So I will say, let me see if I can actually pull up what I said about Kid Cudi. This episode's could probably be a little disjointed while I find my footing, but that's okay. Kid Cudi. Okay, Kid Cudi and the Man on the Moon. Let's see what I wrote here. So Kid Cudi lived on the fringes. The reflection showed by Kid Cudi and the Man on the Moon series helped raise the genre. His knack for finding sounds helped Kanye West develop new sounds on 808s and Heartbreak. And on the mainstream side, this is the other album that gets talked about a lot is 808s and Heartbreak. I would argue that's not emo, because I like music is cultural, and I don't think Kanye could really claim to be part of that scene. It's a little different with Cudi. The other, I mean, the because he did do like a sort of like Death Grips impression, and you know, he had that song like Black Skinheads, and that was very like which pretty much was like a Death Grip song, right? Okay, so that album and Cudi's projects helped introduce electronic sounds into hip hop in a big way. Kid Cudi's Man on the Moon series helped to propel Cudi into a star. So this is this isn't the on the A-side article. This is the brief that I wrote for the Kid Cudi episode 71, which is called Kid Cudi and the Man on the Moon, and analyzing basically what I would say is depressive articles. Yeah, I would say go back and listen to that episode if you want a deeper dive into Kid Cudi in particular, because he is an interesting artist in his own right. So yeah, let's go there. Okay, moving on from that. So we'll talk a little bit about Bones. So I didn't really script anything here for Bones, but Bones is kind of like where the underground kind of took that sort of like emo sound and kind of made it into something else. So Bones was very experimental. Like Bones wasn't afraid to experiment with different types of sounds, and it was very influenced, I would say, by like post-punk and hardcore and that whole scene. So his kind of like style, I would argue, is almost like goth rap more than, say, emo rap, but he definitely influenced the genre to come. And so Bones, and not all of his songs would, in my opinion, would be considered emo rap. He definitely has stuff that like kind of crosses in that lane to like trap metal, to like just straight hip hop songs, to like, you know, so he's a bit of a mix of everything. And he has so much output. So yeah, I mean, I've gotten a little bit into Bones. I can't really say there's a lot of music to digest, but I would say if we are talking about one of the pioneers, I absolutely think Bones would be one of them. yeah. So moving on from Bones and the Bones' influence, move on to what is primarily known as like the definitive, I guess, emo rap era, which is the SoundCloud era, with, artists like Lil Tracy, Lil Peep. I believe Lil Skies might also be considered. Lil Skies, let's see. Do I remember what Lil Skies even sounds like? Yeah, he's in there. Life of a Dark Rose. I mean, that just kind of sounds. Lil Uzi Vert is kind of a tough one because it's very poppy. I don't know his underground stuff, but other like SoundCloud era artists that come to mind are XXXTentacion and Juice WRLD. So the thing is with Lil Peep, XXXTentacion, and Juice WRLD, is they died, right? So tragically, they died. Art imitates life, life imitates art, and now you don't really have these artists really pushing that sound anymore. Or if you did, it kind of sounded like an imitation, or they were trying to do their best imitation, basically, right? So a lot of artists kind of moved off of that sound, even though that was like the modern sound of the 2016 and kind of beyond, until we get to sort of today, which is kind of like the evolution of that sound. So one artist, when I was kind of looking into this a little bit, that I found was Gucci High Waters. The other one is Nobody Nowhere. Gucci High Waters, in my opinion, at least from a sound, from a sonic standpoint, is more of what I would call emo rap. Whereas, was it Nobody Nowhere? Is that it? I was looking for it. Nothing Nowhere. Thank you. Nothing Nowhere. So it's Nothing Nowhere. That's sort of like, I would say, it's changed his sound since even like 2020, 2021, and kind of moved off of that sound. But I would say Gucci High Waters, especially, in my opinion, is sort of the next wave of these artists, right? So, in conclusion, I would say, like, in order to be considered emo rap, I think an artist naturally has to straddle the line between rock culture and rap culture. So I think that's why I don't consider certain artists emo rap, right? So to me, they had to have like a somewhat of a footprint in the rock world. And I think Kid Cudi has. Like, Kid Cudi seems like a very genuine person in that respect. Like, there does seem to be an authenticity there. Like, I believe like Speeding Bullet to Heaven was sort of like his tip of the hat to rock type of thing, right? So another artist I forgot to mention, and I was looking up for my research here, was Idea of Ideas and Abilities. So this is a 2004 article put out by Epitaph Records, which is probably one of the biggest, I believe, punk labels. Let me just fact check that. Epitaph Records. Okay. Yeah. So Epitaph Records is an American independent record label owned by Bad Religion guitarist Brett Gurewitz. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, most acts signed to the label were punk and post-punk, or pop-punk acts, while many post-hardcore and emo bands signed to the label as well. So that is important to note. So, Idea and Abilities are a new strain of hip-hop, written by Robert Morast in 2004. Idea and Abilities are part of a new strain of hip-hop. Punk rock and hip-hop have always been at odds, at least in terms of core values. Since the Sex Pistols defined rebellion in the 70s, punk has thrived on an anti-establishment ethic that denounced capitalism, materialism, sexism, racism, and in some cases, deodorant. Okay, that's pretty funny. Meanwhile, after coming out of inner New York City in the late 70s, hip-hop has gone global with an appreciation for the finer things in life. Yeah, okay. Well, that's... okay, I understand what they're saying, but... okay. Polar opposites, punk and hip-hop, suddenly became attached. See, I don't really think they were as polar opposite as, this writer is arguing. And I think we've definitely seen that in our modern modern day era. What is going on with the soundboard? Oh. Okay, that was weird. Man, this board is good, but it's got a mind of its own sometimes, and it's freaking me out. Just say what you're doing. Just record. That's all I need you to do, soundboard. Okay. Okay. Oh my God. I'm in the middle of recording. Why the fuck does this keep moving? Tech issues aside, the polar opposites punk and hip-hop suddenly are attached courtesy of emo rap, a hip-hop subgenre. It's enough to make you wonder whether emo rap is the new punk rock. Everybody is saying that, says Idea, a so-called emo rapper who will perform with his partner DJ Abilities at the Washington Pavilion on Tuesday night. In the past year, emo rap has become the term music journalists use to describe a stream of underground rappers who mix emotionally charged music with lyrics that diary and diagram life's less pleasant moments, drawing parallels to pathos-heavy emo rock. In the emo rap world, an MC is more likely to rhyme about how an ex-girlfriend broke his heart than project a pimpin' self-image. I mean, yes and no. Like, this is okay. I'll break down my thoughts once I finish reading this out. But while music writers have been squeezing every bit of irony out of rappers with feelings shtick, what's largely gone unnoticed is the same punk rock kids who supposedly hate Eminem, 50 Cent, and every other rapper plastered all over MTV have been magnetized to emo rap. Surprisingly, the subgenre has attracted the same army of disenfranchised youth who usually sign allegiance towards punk rock acts such as At the Drive-In or Bad Religion. There's the kid in high school that says he has to be different. He looks into the underground and gets into Idea, says Idea. That's almost by default. Even Bad Religion's label, Epitaph Records, has taken notice. One of the most vaunted punk labels, Epitaph recently broke habit when it signed Atmosphere. Oh, I didn't know he was signed to Epitaph. Sage Francis and Idea and Abilities to a roster full of strict punk acts. And when Bad Religion's latest album, Empire, The Empire Strikes First, is released in June, the song Let Them Eat War will feature a cameo by Sage Francis, maybe the first intentional merger of emo rap and punk rock. The hip-hop scene is immersed in the same spirit that punks had back in the day when Epitaph first came into existence, says Hector Martinez, a publicist for Epitaph. It's a movement against the mainstream, full of the DIY spirit and a pure form of music from the streets. Okay, so I do agree with this point of what Hector Martinez is saying, is like there is like a DIY or independent spirit of these bands and by proxy these emo quote rappers, right? So definitely that was also very true of the SoundCloud era as well, which was a different era, which I argue is the sort of evolution like further down the road of this era. So the mutual admiration is enough to make you wonder whether we're in the midst of a paradigm shift where young punks are trading in their spikes and guitars for white t-shirts and turntables. And yes, this has already happened, or this is very present in this day and age. The stylized shift of youthful rebellion is perhaps nowhere more evident than here in Sioux Falls, where punk has a strong presence and mainstream hip-hop often feels as relevant as hurricane insurance. During the past year, Idea, Sage Francis, and Atmosphere all have performed shows filled with the same kids who played the part of local punks. Listening to Idea or Atmosphere's angst-fueled ranks on life, it's easy to assume the kids can relate to the emotion. Yet insiders say it has much to do with as what these rappers say as how they're saying it. You listen to Atmosphere, he talks about coffee shops and girls and things we can relate to here. It says, Jason Ways, a local concert promoter in the punk scene, I can't put in a 50 Cent album relate to anything. Atmosphere, the things they talk about are universal. Such comments suggest emo rap is poised to play punk's role for generations, raised in a world where hip-hop rules, but others aren't sold an idea. Okay, so I do want to address something here. So a lot of these emo rap acts were and are white, right? So there is this sense where, like, you know, obviously because, rock music was started by black people, then became very white. And then, there is that sense I gather from, the black community is afraid of that with hip hop and has been for a very long time. Right. And with emo rap and this kind of hip hop, there, I don't know if I'd go as far as arguing that the subtext is that it's like the whitening of hip hop, because he's saying like, oh, I can't relate to 50 Cent because 50 Cent grew up in the hood or whatever. And what Atmosphere talks about is more universal, more relevant. And it's like, well, okay, that just may be like a you thing, right? So I do like emo rap. I was like, and still am kind of attracted to this type of music. But I do think, like, especially at the time when this article was written, were they talking about like, oh, you know, that commercial like hip hop is like garbage and whatever. And it's like, it has its place, right? I think the thinking of today has evolved to kind of accept that we can have both, right? We can have the flashy hip hop with the bling bling era and everything like that, but we can also have deep, insightful music and, you know, not say one is better than the other. And not to say that there aren't like straight hip hop acts. Obviously Kendrick Lamar, I think he won, was it the Pulitzer? Right, for his songwriting abilities. So I just think, looking back in hindsight, reading this article, there is a sort of like racial tension subtext, in my opinion. So okay, let's see what somebody pushing back on this idea. So a paradigm shift is talking about this in a larger movement than it really is, says Kate Levinson, managing editor at Punk Planet magazine. Her publication has noticed the young punks' attraction to underground rap and ran a feature article in Atmosphere last fall. But she's not ready to anoint emo rap as the latest form of punk rock salvation. Besides, she hates the term emo. And this is interesting because a lot of these so-called emo rappers did hate the term. To Levinson, the rise of emo rap is more of a fashion phase than a cultural shift. I grew up in the early 90s and think punk music has become less how the music sounded and more of how we wanted to influence part of our lives. I think it more has to do with creating something independent. So this is a point that I agree with, kind of. So it's an interesting point. So I was live streaming and I watched the Finn McKenty, the punk rock MBA video on this. And he was talking about how, you know, music is both, you know, it's two things. It's one, how it sounds, but also culture, right? Music is culture. And I do agree that this argument is more of a cultural argument, right? So I do kind of agree with Levinson in the sense that it's like we're talking about it as a culture. And I think that's why we have to be careful who we delineate as hip hop and who you know, who's emo, who's, you know, I understand artists don't want to be labeled at all. I think that's unrealistic in my opinion, but I really am wondering what is wrong with this thing. Oh my God, the struggles are real. Okay. I swear to God, if this thing like formats itself, I'm going to freak the fuck out. So their idea does talk about the racial aspect. And at the moment, few styles of music feel as indie as emo rap, which is yet to sign off a major record label. Emo rock, no performer considered emo ever fesses up to the classification. In some people's mind, being emo equates to being wimpy. And whether you're a rapper or rocker, being wimpy is rarely cool. I don't think about emo rap, idea says from his Minneapolis home. I think about it when it comes up in an interview, chimes in abilities via another phone on the same line. We think about trying to write choruses and trying to get to turntables to sound like a guitar, idea says, clarifying that the duo doesn't leisurely wonder whether it is emo. And when posed with the idea of emo rap as the new punk rock, idea points out another similarity between the two camps, that each is dominated by white artists. I fucking love idea, man. To be point blank, calling it the new punk rock or emo rap is a racist term. Interesting, says idea, who is white. They're trying to figure out how to say it's white rappers. They don't say MF Doom, a similarly sounding black artist, is the new punk rock. I do think it... I'm not quite sure what is happening. It's like my soundboard is possessed. Okay, I slightly disagree here. I agree with pretty much everything except the MF Doom example. MF Doom, I'm just going to argue, is not emo or part of the culture in the same way, because, like, yes, he has the independent spirit, and like, if that's what you're basing it on, sure, but I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think there has to be a crossover between punk culture and rap culture. Like, there has to be a crossover at some point, right? Okay, so I'm not sure how much of the whole ideas thoughts here were caught on sound here, but I do agree more or less with his point. But let's continue on. Ideas, theories of musical racial profiling bring to mind another question surrounding emo rap. Why is it regularly compared to punk and not held up against other forms of hip hop? That's interesting. I disagree with that. I just think that's probably the built-in audience, I think, maybe. But that's what I'm trying to figure out now, says Robert Boo, Rosario music editor at The Source, a leading hip hop magazine. The answer seems mysterious until Rosario begins talking about atmosphere and says the group's music is hip hop infused, as opposed to being labeled straight up hip hop, a la anything by Jay-Z or Method Man. I disagree with that. I would say atmosphere is as hip hop as anything else. Idea, I think, has more like guitar laden stuff, maybe. Rosario even says that while he respects emo rap, he doesn't think he could listen to an entire album. It would probably drive me crazy, he says, while adding some of hip hop's peers don't give emo rap that much credit. It's obvious emo rap is slighted by the strict hip hoppers, much the same way punk rock is often considered beneath the standards of rock and roll. We're making hip hop music, but it's our version of hip hop music. You can't say it sounds like something else. His music may sound unique, but in 2004, it sure sounds like punk rock. Okay, and then this continues on into the SoundCloud era. Like this conversation does extend itself into the SoundCloud era, right? Where a lot of independent artists, a lot of, depressive music. So I'm very glad that idea brought that argument into the equation there. So I think MF Doom was kind of the wrong example, but his overall point and message is good. I do think it's difficult because it's like, I don't think that music was bad. I actually think it was great, right? Like I said, I gravitated towards that music, but I also like strictly hip hop too, right? And I don't think we should say that or prescribe value to it more than what it is, right? It's like, and I think Bones did a good job of that in my opinion, because Bones did it in a way where he was just kind of mixing sounds and he kind of did his own thing and kind of ran with it, right? So I think that was kind of a benefit. And I think Kid Cudi was also another great example of somebody who kind of probably did grow up listening to these bands and was influenced them and then brought that to a hip hop. And then hip hop overall, I would say, became more accepting of rock culture. I don't know how rock music or like rock fans necessarily feel about hip hop, right? But I do feel like hip hop became more accepting. So it's kind of interesting that in some ways, right? Like obviously it's not applicable for everyone, but like no one's going to be like, hey, that doesn't have a drum beat. Oh, this is a guitar laden beat. This is not hip hop anymore. We're way past that stage now. Right. And so like sample those, like, samples from rock bands, from hardcore bands, from punk bands, like it's all good. Right. So yeah, that's my take. This has been The Freeze, the podcast about hip hop chatter. I'm Brian Capitao, also known as Vazro. Here's the intro to take you out.
The Freeze.
Podcast.
The Freeze.
Podcast.
The Freeze. Pod.